Morning, everybody. So, what we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about motivation. Next week, we're going to talk about emotion. So, when you're talking about motivation, motivation is something that starts or stops a behavior. So, you have your internal motivation, and that's what they call intrinsic motivation. That's the little voice inside of you that says, this is the right thing to do because, and you may not always understand why. You're helping old people. You stop to help somebody change a tire. You see somebody on the side of the road uh, who needs food, and so you give them food. You know, sometimes that's your intrinsic motivation. That's inside of you that says, "Hey, they need help. Help them." That's the internal. That's your little voice. That's that little voice that says, "Do the right thing." Some of that is developed in us, and some of it's not. Uh, when you're talking about the external is more or less the outside voice or the voice of authority. Like if you don't stop for a stop sign, the external voice is going to stop you, and you are going to get a big ticket. Like running a red light. That's the external. So you've got the internal, which is your inner voice. You've got the external, which is the outside. We talked about this a little bit in sociology. The intrinsic versus the uh, external. um, it's the whole idea of like doing the right thing because it's the right thing to do versus the external. Also, if you break the law, there is a consequence to that. That's the external. Most of us will do the right thing, you know, and because we know the right thing to do deep down inside. That's the internal. That's our little voice. The question is, what's motivating you to go to college? If you are, what's making you? Is it the drive that you have to succeed? Is it because your parents, who are the external voice, are saying, go, go, go? Is it because you love school? I mean, what is it? What's motivating you? And you have to decide that for yourself. What's motivating you to go to college? In my case, my dad was convinced that I wasn't going to go to school, that I could not make it. And so my little internal voice was telling me, well, I'm going to prove you wrong. And I did. And I proved him wrong. He was convinced I was going to fail, and I set out to prove him wrong, and I did. You know, that was partly initially my motivation. And then I found out that I really did like school, and I stayed in school for years, and I have a master's degree because of it. So, motivation is a powerful, powerful, powerful thing. Um, if you have no motivation, you need to find the motivation inside of you to do something. You know, what's motivating you to do work in this class? You want to pass, correct? So, there you go. So let's talk about instinct theory for a minute. So, when you're talking about instinct theory, this is like the inner drive that you have, for example, to have children. And then keep in mind that this is a theory. This is not, this is something that psychologists look at, and they looked at animals, and then they looked at us, and then they looked at animals again, and they kind of compared the two together and said, we can apply this to people. So, you might notice that, when you get into your 20s and in your 30s, and some of you even in your 40s, like you have this desire to have kids. That's the instinct theory. It's Scientists talk about it being genetic. Um, it's related to sex in most cases. You know, it's a genetic drive. Where I think this theory falls short is that you're being compared to a monkey, or you're being compared to a giraffe or a horse. They definitely have a drive to have children because they have a certain time where they have they have babies, to put it mildly. Um, so when you get into instinct theory, there are people that challenge that, but for a lot of us, that there is a time that we know that at some point we want to have children, and some of us won't, and that's another thing. Some of us won't have kids. So whether instinct theory is a real thing or not, it's a theory that is studied quite widely. The same thing with drive theory. So if you're going to talk about drive theory, that's reducing stress caused by unmet emotional needs. So if you think about drive theory, I have a bad day. I'm hungry. I'm sad. I'm angry. I'm lonely. I go home and what I do is I drink a 6-pack of beer. Or I go to Subway and I get their biggest sandwich, their foot long, and I eat all of that in one sitting. And I chase that back with a Coca-Cola. And it makes me feel better. It's like drive theory can be like going home and binge watching a television show. It's all about stress reduction. You know, the eating because you were sad. If you do that repeatedly, you're going to get fat. You know, um, there are healthy ways of reducing stress, and there are not so many healthy ways of reducing stress. But that's all drive theory. Now, let's talk about incentive theory. When you're talking about incentive theory, here's how this works. When you signed up for this class, the incentive was that if you did your work, that you would get the grade. That's incentive theory. So, it's all through life. So when I wanted to buy a house, I knew that I had to have the down payment. So I worked until I earned the down payment on my house in order to pay for my house. That's incentive theory. I have an incentive. When I wanted to go on a vacation and I was really, really little, my mother would put a calendar up and would put the little airplanes up there for every day that I would get closer to the vacation. And when I misbehaved, she would take an airplane off. And so I had an incentive to behave because I knew if I didn't behave, then I didn't get the reward. And so at the end of that time period, I had behaved enough that I got to my vacation. My parents had the tickets and we went. And I got to see my little friend. The same thing, you're at the age now, most of you, where you're starting to think about driving. You save enough money and you might buy a cheap car. But see, that's the thing, is you have the incentive to work because that's your car. That's something that you have saved up for, you have earned it, and now it is yours. And it's a really powerful feeling when you go and you get your driver's license and you have your first car. It's sort of like a feeling of freedom. And so that's all incentive theory. When my dad told me that he wasn't going to pay me my allowance anymore, my incentive was to get a job. If I wanted any more money, go get a job. If I wanted to lay around the house and just continue to eat his food, then I wouldn't have any money. And I would have to figure out a way to get that money. So I worked. When I was in college and I was broke poor, what I did was I did college work study. And so I got a little bit of money every week or so. And, that was pocket cash for me. I always worked in college because I knew I wanted a little more money. And I needed a little more money. I didn't really have a car, didn't really have enough, but I had a bicycle. I saved to buy that bicycle. And my incentive was really at that point to get through school, because I knew that I would get a good job. And so, all of those things are incentives. So, well, anyway, that's motivation theory, and we're going to talk about emotion next week. Now, when you're talking about that kind of stuff, you got to understand that, we're motivated by all sorts of things. And, like, I'm motivated to give this lesson because not only do I know it's a part of my job, but, that I miss teaching. I miss teaching you guys. And I hope you understand that I'm sincere in that, you know. And so here's the incentive that I'm going to throw out to you. If you watch this and you give a thumbs up, I'll give you a grade for watching this. Okay? So give a thumbs up on the teams. Okay? So I'll know because you watched it. Okay? All right. Have a good day. I miss you. Hopefully we'll see you May 4th. Bye-bye.